I see that we are at 6:30, so let us begin with prayer. Almighty God, you have given us your only Son, so that he may be for us both a sacrifice for sin and an example of godly living. Give us grace that we may always receive the priceless gift of his redemption with sincere thankfulness and daily strive to walk in the blessed steps of his most holy life. Amen. So chapter 11 today was the section that you were asked to read, and we will make use of the questions on page 184 as our jumping off point. And I don't know if my feeling is accurate, but I thought maybe this chapter may end up facilitating a little bit more discussion in going back to the chapter 2, just because of the practical nature of it that is laid there before us. But we'll see what happens. So question 1 there on page 184 says, describe how Paul motivates husbands and wives in their respective roles. Brad.
It uses Christ as the example.
Yeah, and specifically in the aspect of Christ, what relationship?
Between Christ and his church.
Yeah, he really paints and pictures the relationship of husband and wife with the backdrop, or even in the foreground, the relationship of Christ and the church. Question 2, what is the most practical thing Scripture teaches us? Nancy.
Proclaiming God's message of salvation.
Yep, I'm proclaiming God's message of salvation. And, you know, it's one of those things, and such a good chapter as far as reminders of what we want to be all about. I think it's probably one of those chapters that we read and we say, yep. And yet at the same time, one of those chapters we need to read to make sure that is still and always our focus. Because it's easy. And I think, the next question really helps bring that out. The difference between good things and God's things. Such a valuable thought. So, proclaiming that message of salvation, and as the author kind of brings about too, is the Christian life that flows from it as well. The second part of that question: how does this shape a congregation's order of priorities and a pastor's ministry? Brad?
It should be the number one priority is to proclaim God's message of salvation.
And consider that too. In proclaiming the message of salvation, what doctrines, teachings must be taught? Evan? Law and gospel. Yep. Law and gospel. Pastor?
Well, it was interesting with how do you counsel pre-marriage counseling to a non-Christian? That was kind of thought of that before.
Yeah, and in the connection of that section, not that there isn't the ability to counsel an unbeliever in marriage, but technically you'll have to counsel them in good things. Much more in the specific aspect of the backdrop of Christ and the church, because the unbeliever doesn't have an understanding of Christ and the church and what that means.
Along those lines, then sometimes I know that churches use marriage seminars and that kind of stuff as outreach to others. Is that saying that's not a good place to start?
It's an excellent question, and one of those things that is valuable to take a step back and ask, what is the purpose and what is the goal of what we are doing? Now, I think it's one of those cases of where you say, okay, if this, and I have a mindset of reaching the members and the families of the congregation, and it just so happens that one of my members says, hey, Sally and Frank, you want to come with us to this marriage counseling? And in the process of that marriage counseling, then there's opportunity to make a connection with individuals. I think that at no point is it a case of we need to say this is limited to only members. But the wisdom is should this be looked at as an outreach event? Then to step back and say, well, not really. Because if we're seeking to make this an outreach event, how can I reach out making connection to something they don't understand? Much like, once again, is an individual who's being invited by member A and member B to worship understanding every aspect of the worship service? No. Are you proclaiming the gospel in the worship service? The prayer is absolutely yes. And then there's the connection. All right, let's go into the next stage. Can I stop and visit? Let's have a conversation. Where are you at? Well, let's begin with a Bible instruction course. It was interesting, and jumping kind of back to the idea of looking at our chapter already before finishing the questions, but this seems to be a natural fit. But I was called out of the blue. I'm guessing maybe now we're talking 6 months ago, maybe it's even more like 8 months ago, by an individual asking if I would provide them marriage counseling. Or couple counseling, since they weren't married. And I said to them, I would be happy to sit down with you. I said, please understand, if you are going to come in, everything that I say to you is going to be coming from the Word of God and from the vantage point of what the Bible has to say. Understand that I'm not just a secular counselor here. I don't have a degree in counseling either, but I will share what God's Word has to say. They still came in, sat there, and in listening to them, I very much could say that I sided with one individual far more than I did the other individual. And I said to them, and I'd say I shared with them some good things, but then I said to them, ultimately, and one of the good things I suppose you could say I shared with them, and I use that in the aspect of not patting myself on the back, but in context of this chapter, the good thing versus God's thing. I said to them, if you really want this relationship to work, start by not living together. And then I said, and let's sit down for Bible study. And I pulled out my course that I use for BIC, and I said, this is what I'd like to take you through. I said, because nothing's going to change unless you're first have your heart worked on by the Holy Spirit. They never contacted me back, unfortunately. But it was interesting reading this, and sometimes it's one of those things of where you say, once again, yep, but I don't know I ever put it into words specifically the same way the author did. But recognizing nothing's going to change in your relationship until first your relationship with your Savior changes, and then it can flow to your relationship to one another. So in answer to your question, does it mean that you have to say to the members, but don't invite people? No. But is something in that regard the place to start as an outreach event? No, because how is that going to be understood? There's better ways to do an outreach event than that way. Did I see your hand going up before, Brad, or no?
You had asked about
Oh, yeah.
Justification.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think about that, and the reason I asked it is because of this fact of when it comes to proclaiming the message of salvation, that also includes law. In the aspect of I only understand salvation, I only understand that I'm declared not guilty when I understand that I'm guilty of something. And so there's that need to proclaim law and gospel in the priorities of bringing individuals out of that darkness of unbelief into the light of Christ. Evan, you have a question?
More kind of continuing on that, talking about preaching the order of prioritizing the Word of God, clear and truth, not muddled or watered down, using the aspect of law and gospel, that if you only give the gospel, in essence, you're watering down the Holy Scriptures, because if all you hear is gospel, you will not necessarily value it as much if you don't have the law that
And so coming back to that aspect of the absolute necessity of the truths of God's Word, as we've talked about before, the golden threads running through all of Scripture, the law and the gospel. Question 3, why should a church focus on God's things and not just good things? Pastor.
Well, your God things have an eternal value. So then the final goal for everything, whereas good things are just life, food, tomorrow's touchy-feely things.
And take the contra to the first part of what you say is, and it's not that it's wrong. Once again, and the author himself, is not saying that good things are bad. But notice the contra, the opposite of God's things have to deal with eternal, have to deal with heaven. What's the opposite? The good things, ultimately, their goal is, the focus is, earthly happiness. Once again, not that earthly happiness is bad. Not that doing good things, or for example, not that making use of some sort of counselor's advice to stay away from or help yourself in victories over sin. Not that that's bad, but you stop and you think about it. The individuals who came into my office asking, would you provide counseling? What's their goal? Nothing more than making their earthly relationship better. And that's the end. And so too, when it comes to these simply the good things, is if my goal is nothing more than overcoming this sin so my life is better, that's missing out on one of the aspects of what the Lord has to say of, no, it's overcoming this sin for the sake of the glory of God and my eternal well-being. And good things can help us in that aspect. But good things, and their focus is ultimately only this earth. Evan.
I guess when I was reading the difference between God things and good things, I was thinking of the verses in Revelation where the people who think that they were a part of God's kingdom being like, well, didn't we do all these good things and stuff like that? And Jesus saying, verily I tell you, I do not know you. That when you focus too much on the good things and sacrifice the godly things, that eternal value, as Pastor mentioned, is forfeit. So you need to balance both of them, because all air quote good works.
And I won't tell you that your mind can't go to that passage or to that aspect when you read those good things. And once again, kind of in the context of the chapter, it isn't so much a work righteousness that the author has in mind when he references the good things, but rather an attitude and a focus that he has in mind when he references the good things versus the God's things. And maybe that helps too of kind of answering the second part of question 3 there, as the author kind of lays it out. What's the difference between the two, the good things and God's things?
Well, one thing is the eternal and the temporary.
Yeah. Focus on the earthly, focus on the eternal. Did you catch what he had to say too about good things we learn how, and God's things we learn how? Good things, he mentioned, are things learned by experience. God's things are things revealed to us through the knowledge of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. Coming back to, finally those God's things and the things that are revealed to us through Jesus are all those aspects that deal with our salvation. But it's an interesting, it's a vital, it's an important aspect to keep in mind too there, is the good things is really this aspect of an experience rather than a revealed knowledge. Question 4. The author writes, only what transcends this life is truly practical. Do you think he is right? Brad.
Full disclosure, I have not read this chapter yet. I've been a chapter behind almost the entire time.
You didn't have to tell me. I would have known.
My name is Brad. I haven't read the chapter. However, I think it does come down to what is practical. How do you define practical? Because when I think of practical, I think of something that is very useful and that I can use right now. And in that respect, right, the gospel, one of the things the book has really been trying to bring out is how useful the gospel is to us right now in motivation. It may not be as visual, maybe, but useful. It certainly is.
And so you are saying yes, correct?
I am
Ultimately?
yes.
Yep. Evan.
I guess I will throw my head into the ring and say yes in the spiritual sense. And I guess the word truly kind of is the hang up. But in things that do not necessarily, like the good things that aren't necessarily related to God's things, you can make the case that there are truly practical things that can be within this life that, how do I say this right?
I'm gonna stop you, and only because I want to kind of jump off a phrase you said, and so that we can remember it. My question to you would be, and question to all of us as we consider this question, is there such a thing as a good thing that does not relate to God's things?
Well, I think that gets back to the statement that was made in the book. Whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, do it all to the glory of God.
And every good thing comes from God. He tells us that.
And the more and more that 1 Corinthians passage, whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. The more and more that's been a passage that is used in confirmation and in instruction classes, the more and more it just has struck me how fascinating it is that the Holy Spirit inspired Paul to use the most mundane thing that we do, that we don't even think twice about. Eating and drinking. We do it every day. We recognize how we need to do it every day, and that every day that we do it, we need it to stay alive, and yet the most mundane thing has to do with God's things. Do it all to the glory of God. In the language of our seminary professors, it was the term Habitus Practicus, that all of theology, all of doctrine is practical. And if you stop and think about it, a theologian, from the vantage point of the world, how would they define a theologian? Okay, somebody who studies the Bible, and we might even go so far as to say, in order for somebody to call them a theologian, we'd say they know the Bible better than others. How would the Bible describe a theologian? Evan.
Someone who hears the word of God and obeys it.
Okay, I like the definition. I do. Anybody have anything more to add to that? And I would. Go ahead, Dave.
It's more than just knowing it. You have to share it with others as God wants it to be shared for salvation, leading a good life, and giving glory to God. I'm reading Grace about this from front to back. They said the three main readings of the Bible.
And that's why your definition is great, and yours too, and we can marry them, can't we? We can marry those responses in the aspect of it's the individual who knows Christ, the individual who leads people to Christ. It's the individual who lives according to that word and leads others to live according to that word too, right? Every believer is ultimately a theologian. It's not the way that the world would look at the term a theologian, though. And that's because of the way that oftentimes theology is looked at. Theology is looked at as that's for the people who want to spend time studying the Bible and get down to the nitty-gritties of why it matters that Jesus is true God and true man, and why it matters that, and when it is that he descended into hell, and what's the aspects of him ascending into heaven. No, all I need to know is that Jesus died for me and I'll go to heaven. But the Bible comes and says, no, it's more. Whether we eat or drink, whatever you do it all to the glory of God. And the author did a beautiful job, didn't he? What is it? God's glory? God is glorified when he brings people from darkness to light, extends his rule of grace, and leads people into heaven. God is glorified when people honor, love, and obey him and worship him by following his commands. God is glorified when people seek to grow in Christ, seeking first his kingdom and resting content to have God give them what he wants to give them according to his time schedule. It's a whole lot more than Jesus died for me, my wife, my 2 children, us 4, no more, and I don't need to know anymore. But here's the question. In your mind, in opinion, in your mind, are there many Christians who think that's all that's necessary? I think there unfortunately are. And we want to go beyond that surface aspect of it. And understand, there is no compartmentalizing my Christian life because all of the good things of this world are God's things. Did I see a hand up?
Do you enjoy being back in seminary every Wednesday night with all the theologians helping you out?
I do. I do.
Just sharing what I know.
Rudy.
I think there's another side to it in addition to all the stuff that we've been talking about. And that is the theologian lives what he teaches.
I wouldn't disagree with you one bit, but I would say that probably has been mentioned in this aspect too, and that is, as you think of Evan's response, blessed is the one who hears the word of God and obeys it, lives it. The aspect of Dave's response of not just knowing, but then also living it as well. It is part of it. It comes back to that comment that we made mention of, I think it was last week, is that at no point will our works ever save us. But if we just brush the idea that God wants us to live according to his word and live this life of faith and say, that's not important, it can destroy faith. Yeah. Dave.
Just a practical thing that you said a moment ago, that Jesus is Savior, I think that's all it is. So Gary, I started having this discussion with Asian about dying. He said, well, trying to teach, I believe Jesus was Savior, but I don't believe in that Old Testament stuff. And so, for a 30-minute discussion, she was convinced that the first 5 books of the Bible weren't real. So my statement to her was what she said. I go, we need to know that Jesus is our Savior, but I go, kind of paraphrasing what you said before, I think you're putting your salvation at potential risk if you're rejecting all this other stuff and turn to the Son who actually believes what I was saying and say, to your mother, I'm free with you. So I was interested in mentioning this night because there are actually people out there that are like that.
I think it's worth just kind of drawing attention to. I think it's a very nice response and a good response. Rather than harping on the individual or quote unquote condemning the individual for holding to that, to come back with a soft but true response of saying, I fear that you might be placing your salvation at risk is a nice way to respond in that regard. It's much less of an offensive type of terminology and yet relays that truth well. Well, it is interesting because I've had the conversation before. I look at individuals. You mentioned the Grace Abounds book. I think of the individual who wrote it, Pastor Deutschlander. I think of the fact that I had him as a professor. I think of other professors that I had, and I say, well, I don't know that I'd ever be in a position to teach the way that they did. And I might not have those gifts in that regard, and that's okay. The Lord gives different gifts to different individuals to be used within his church. But I know that at times I've maybe made the comment, and I know I did early on in my ministry to my father, and said, I'm no theologian like they are. And my dad would remind me, he says, yes, you are. And I think it's a valuable thing for us to keep in mind. Sometimes we may sit and say, well, I'm no theologian like the pastor of my congregation. I'm no theologian like the one who's teaching Sunday school. Yes, you are. And I'm going to come back to this thought is, okay, so there are some individuals who perhaps have the mindset that I don't need to know any more than this surface level stuff and that's it. Why do you think that is? I think there's a part of that. If I learn too much, I will be expected to change the way I live. I ask that question in part that we examine ourselves. Is there sometimes those aspects of not digging deeper, because the more I know, the more that things will be expected of me. Annette.
You just added that by saying that. I was just going to say, there's more work involved the deeper you go. It's light and fluffy, but when you actually start digging deeper, it's difficult.
Yeah. Evan.
So it's kind of maybe like a visual interpretation. It's kind of like digging in your backyard and you look like, oh shoot, there's a sewer line. Oh no, there's a gas leak, and you're seeing all these things, and if you just left it be, you could have this ignorance is bliss thing, and then when you actually get down to it, you realize, oh, there's a lot of things that need to be addressed.
Yeah, and not to just only throw it out on somebody else either, in the aspect of saying it's because individuals might not want to know more. I think there's definitely a place for pastors, and I think about how the author of this book began in the introduction to it, saying, sometimes I feel as I look back at my ministry, maybe I was a little shallow in gospel motivation too. I think there's cause for pastors to examine. Is part of the reason that it hasn't gone deeper is because I haven't led them deeper. And that's where I would encourage individuals who sometimes, maybe there is a concern or a hesitation, maybe it's a better word, hesitation to participate in a Bible study that I feel might be over my head, is a reminder, is that no, that's precisely the type of Bible study to participate in. Is every last detail of that Bible class necessarily going to stick the way you want it to? No. But guess what? I read a book like this, I read a book like Grace Abounds, or a doctrinal book that I have, and I wish I could say every part of it sticks, and it doesn't. You go back and you go over it again and again in order to help it stick. So that encouragement, if there's that Bible study, don't stay away because I'm fearful that it might be confusing. Let me ask questions, and if I don't want to ask in front of others, ask privately. But the truth of the matter is oftentimes if there's a question here and you have it, probably somebody else has it too. I learned that going through school. It took me a long time to learn myself. You don't want to look silly. But oftentimes it's when you ask the questions you actually learn the most, because then all of a sudden I'm taking those questions I have and I'm being able to wrap things together. And you're probably not the only one with that question either. Question 5. How does Paul lead the Corinthians to view the following problems? Chapter 5, and the matter of incest within the Corinthian congregation. Pastor. Correct. Yep. On page 143, I kind of, rather than writing it because we don't have that much room in the back, I just kind of highlighted it. That first full paragraph, second sentence, it says, Jesus, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. We have the forgiveness of sins. We are to rid our lives of the leaven of sin and be pure, just as we really are. He makes the comment in this chapter of one of the ways in which we can grow in this is studying books of the Bible, right? And all the way through it, and letting God speak to us in those books, God's things. And I just, when it came to this reference, I just, in my mind, during the Lenten season, as we had the Shadows of the Cross Lenten series that I made use of, I used this section of Corinthians as one of the lessons for the day, because I wanted to connect the Passover lamb then to the Passover lamb now in that reference. There's one of the challenges, though, is we read that lesson, but do we connect it to what's all really going on? It's so challenging. You could have a mini sermon on every lesson and then the sermon, in order to kind of try and bring all those things together. And while there's nothing bad with that, at the same time, it would make the service go pretty long if we were to do that. But it's one of those aspects of there's value, and I've often thought that maybe one of the type of Bible studies that would be of value is a Bible study on the 3 lessons coming up on a Sunday morning the week before. And a somewhat, not necessarily this great in-depth of taking this, that, and the other thing and making it an hour long on each lesson, but taking those 3 lessons so that now all of a sudden comes Sunday morning, as I'm hearing these things, I'm also connecting it in the wide body of the worship service.
You didn't catch it, I'd say, Lord, now you have a good reason to do the sermon, because you heard it all on Wednesday night. There is that problem.
Okay, I guess I'll just do the 2 lessons that aren't being preached on. Evan.
But maybe with that in mind, maybe having the air quote dedicated school year Bible studies that we review a book or read a book of the Bible or something like that, and then during the summer months, maybe doing those Wednesday sermon text and lesson text or something during the summer months. Maybe that could organize, I don't know, all the things, but that might be a good schedule, possibly, as kind of brainstorming. But yeah.
Yep, and no, I appreciate it, in that regard. As I say, people who have ideas of Bible classes always share them with me. My thought process would be that wouldn't replace a Wednesday evening. It may be more be something that would be offered perhaps a mid-morning, a mid-afternoon. Those who could make it, but it would be videoed so that an individual could go on and watch it perhaps. And there's one that maybe it's an easier thing to make use of in a virtual way because of the type of Bible study, and then maybe the opportunity for somebody to say, let's take a look at this on a Thursday evening, a Friday evening. So just thoughts that sometimes roll around in my head. Do you have a thought?
Very interesting what Paul said here when he talked about the incest case of the man having a relationship with his mother-in-law. When you don't do anything about it, you have lived it yourself. And the gospel.
Yeah. Certainly a very strong application to our Savior's words of Matthew 18. And as I've said many a times, and I kind of say repeatedly because I think it's a valuable thing to keep in mind, is that the letters that the Spirit inspired the authors to write in really Romans to the end are simply applications in many respects to what Jesus said in the Gospels. They're not giving us new doctrines. What about the second one there from chapter 6, verses 1 to 11, and the lawsuits? How does Paul deal with that problem. Nancy?
He first rebuked them for their greed and their wickedness, but then he reminds them when they're still justified in the Lord.
Yeah, and the author did a nice job, I thought, of reminding us. It's not a case if he came in and just simply sprinkled gospel upon them and said, here's the sprinkle magic dust that'll solve all the problems. He also had the law in there and rebuked them. But the encouragement, it wasn't just, all right, here you go, this is going to end badly for you if you continue doing this. No, here's the reality of the matter is you're going contrary to God's word. Here's not only the forgiveness for the sin, but the motivation to no longer do it. And that, what a beautiful section, right? This is who you were, but that's not who you are. If there's one thought that this whole entire book has again and again kind of emphasized for us is the reminder of gospel motivation has a ton to do with us understanding who we are. And that's that whole idea. More than just Jesus died for you. This is who you are. Be who you are. What about the sexual immorality? What does he point out in that section? He points out that aspect of the relation of the body to the Lord, right? The Holy Spirit lives in you. Isn't that's a marvelous thing. That's an awesome thing. Look at that relation of your body to the Lord. Let that motivate you to not unite your body to a prostitute. Not just the fact that it's going to hurt your marriage. It'll do that too. But look at this relationship that you have with the Lord. What about food sacrificed to idols? There he speaks about what the knowledge as well as the blessings of being known by God. So you've got a lot of knowledge, and so you realize you can eat this meat and it's not a problem. So he ties into that word. Understand that you're known by God, and the one who's known by God, what are you going to do? Reflect His love. Oh, so you've got this knowledge, but understand you're known by God. The one known by God is going to reflect love, so guess how you're going to treat the eating of meat if there's those who struggle with it? Love. Love. And there's that aspect of us that says, well, yeah, Paul's being inspired by the Holy Spirit as he writes these things too. Yeah. But we can also, not inspired, but be led by the Spirit as we seek to connect this motivation in those aspects too. And what about idol feasts?
He links the New Testament Christians to the Old Testament Christians, and he uses the sins of the Old Testament to warn against idolatry and feasts. We now have the Lord's Supper.
Yeah. That could make use, and it's probably once a year, if not a couple times a year, that as pastors get together in some of the circuit meetings and we talk and discuss things and we talk about maybe a general aspect of people maybe not having as firm of a grasp of Old Testament Bible lessons as much as maybe once upon a time they did, and kind of the reminder to one another. When you think about introductions to sermons, think about Old Testament Bible lessons. And is there one that fits your theme and the thought process? And in the process, what are you doing? You're connecting those truths of the Old Testament to the truths of the New Testament, and also instructing in the aspect of the Bible lessons of the Old Testament too, and increasing that knowledge in that regard. And what about chapter 11? Separatism and favoritism in worship services. Evan.
Yes, looking to Jesus, that Jesus did not come in pomp and circumstance into Jerusalem. He welcomed that sinners into his household. Think of that Nicodemus and Zacchaeus and all these things, that you don't treat others lesser because of their sins or their status or how much financially beneficial they may be to you or your congregation, that you love because you first love us.
And in that section, think about too of where's the favoritism, what's the separatism, what's it all revolving around? The sacrament of the Lord's Supper. And so what is he connected to? Well, consider all the blessings of the sacrament of Holy Communion. Now, once again, as was mentioned before, he does not avoid a rebuke. Consider what he has to say in that section. Anybody who eats and drinks without recognizing the body and blood of the Lord eats and drinks judgment on themselves. And as you are really actually making use of this feast as an opportunity to be elitists and separatists as well as getting drunk, you are not examining yourself properly, and you're sinning. He even goes so far as to say, because he's inspired by the Holy Spirit, it's for this reason that some of you have fallen asleep. He directly connects the abuse of the sacrament to people dying as a judgment from God for their sin. But it's not, there's your motivation. Watch out, you might die too. No, the motivation is, look at the blessings of the sacrament. For you, forgiveness, a connection to Christ, and this beautiful connection to one another. Why would there be a separatist or elitist mentality if that is the blessing of the sacrament? There is his motivation. He's not seeking to motivate by means of the law, but motivate by means of the gospel. See, now that there's not masks, I can see quizzical faces. Did I see one, Brad?
Yeah, so. No, but so I, this idea of not using the gospel as law, right? Okay, and so when you just said this in my mind, I go, okay, so now would this be a good way to help you to not use the gospel as law, is to use law, to use rebuke, and then gospel. If you're just using gospel, you might actually fall into using it as the law accidentally.
I think that's a very valid statement and a thought, is that if I'm going in there and I say to an individual, look at everything you're forfeiting. As you do this sin, as you do that sin, all these blessings are gone. You're done. You speak about blessings, but now the fact that those blessings are gone becomes a law. But when I rebuke with the law, now those blessings become the motivation, the gospel that it's intended to be, correct? Yeah. And you think about that all the way back into the beginning of this book too, where he mentioned those aspects and how easily, if we don't understand the fact that the law needs to be proclaimed, the gospel becomes nothing more than a set of rules.
He was talking about the rich looking down on the poor, and he talked about the Lord's Supper. And I'm trying to think of our own situation today. Our congregations, have I ever seen that?
We may not see it in connection with the Lord's Supper, but do we see it at times between individual members of where there are some who may think or have a mentality of a separatist or elitist over against others? And I'd say, unfortunately, because sin is not dead and Satan still is hard at work, that is very easy to happen. And I would say that some of the areas you might see it most, or I say that the temptation is there at times greatest, is in a case of a long or well-established congregation that has founding members of that church who are members there, and therefore have the mindset that they perhaps are of greater importance to the congregation because of the importance they played in getting the congregation started. I got to know the individual well enough to know that it wasn't intended that way, but my vicar year, the first interaction I had with one of the ladies of the Ladies' Aid was, "Hello, my name is," and I am one of the most prominent members of this congregation. I don't believe she meant it entirely in the way it came across, but she had been instrumental in that congregation for years, and her parents had been instrumental in founding the congregation. She had been instrumental in providing things for the congregation over the years. I think it meant more, getting to know her, that she meant more in the aspect of, I've been a member here all my life, and here's some of the things that I have done. Not always a case of patting oneself on the back, but those things happen. I think it can happen too of where an individual maybe is blessed financially, and they've given for many years, and many of the programs and many of the things that are taking place within the congregation happen in large part because of their generosity and their grace and gift of giving. But then all of a sudden something happens that frustrates them, and then they stop because they say, well, if it's not going to happen the way I want it to happen. So I think you're right. It doesn't happen so much in the connection of the sacrament of communion. Part of that is because of the way they celebrated it in connection with the way that we celebrate it. And I'm not saying that we celebrate the Lord's Supper differently, but it became, and oftentimes was in the early Christian church, an opportunity for people to gather together even for a meal, and then they would celebrate the sacrament as well. Since we do it within the context of the worship service, we don't see it happen that same way, but it can happen and does unfortunately happen in other ways. And anytime that somebody just elevates a blessing or a gift that the Lord has given to them to the point of saying, somehow this makes me better. It can happen with pastors too. In the aspect of carrying themselves. Well, I'm the one who knows the Bible better than anybody else, and so let me carry myself in this way, that way. And there can be an elitist mentality there too.
The only elitist thing that comes to my mind is when people, maybe they attend church more than somebody else. They feel that puts a blood on or something. I've seen that.
And if you haven't seen others, then that's a blessing too. Perhaps there hasn't been those things in the congregations that you've been part of, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing.
Well, I came from a German area, so something that you mentioned about those old German families that established that congregation, or those two congregations, and, the private.
Yeah. And it's not just German, ultimately. I mean, there might be some personalities within the Germans that bring those things out, but it's not just Germans who can be full of themselves, unfortunately. Pastor.
Just a small congregation on Washington State that, very few people, members, whatever, and of course they all have their views. And one Sunday there was actually a visiting family that came and got seated in the pew. And this family that they actually came up and said, we would be cool, this is our pew. You can believe that, finding visitors.
Yeah. And that's kind of a nice little dovetail too into the aspect of this chapter too, right? There's a place in a Bible study, there's a place within a sermon to mention the good thing of let's be welcoming to individuals who come into the congregation, right? There's absolutely a place for it. What would the God's thing be? We love because he first loved us, right? Is the aspect of finally connecting it to the reality of salvation. Why am I willing to love? Because God loved me, the worst of sinners, that I might have a place in his house. Why in all the world would I ever tell somebody they can't have a place in this house because it's my seat? That's God's things. That touches it back to that aspect. So there's a place for the other. I mean, but there's where the motivation needs to be from, rather than just, well, guess what? They'll never come back. It's true, but let's let God's love be the reason why we say this is the way we act. We have just a couple minutes. Was there anything else that, or anything in the chapters that people highlighted that we didn't touch on that you wanted to kind of touch on before we close this chapter? Pastor?
I just had a couple of comments. One, in our travels this past week, Southern Missouri, it's interesting, some of the singers and whatever people we talked to, and it was like, two or three people said this, I was several years at the Baptist church, and 5 years I was with the Methodist church. Right now I'm serving with the Presbyterian church, and there seemed to be no concept that I was so rather than God's things, my things is the world. The other thing I wanted to bring out is that in this chapter, so often it's look at how Paul's structure exists and how Paul says about that, how he doesn't, you can't lose sight of the fact that God is inspiring every single word that he puts down in order.
And that last comment, not the first one was bad, but the last comment is a good one for us to remember, because we don't want to walk away with the mindset of saying, I can only witness, or I can only encourage somebody, or I can only point them if I have this gift of Paul to put everything into the way that he put it. And that's such a valuable thing to remember, that the Lord will bless the words we speak when we speak his words, and when we focus on God's things. And even promises to help us with the words that we need to speak at those times as well. And not for us to be hesitant or fearful because we can't do it the same way as we read in Scripture. I was going to, as you were talking there, say something about the one, going from church to church. Sometimes is that, and maybe that's a better way of putting it. I don't want to say that's the reason why, but sometimes is it the reason because what they are looking for is nothing more than the practical advice to make their life go better, and they don't want to hear the doctrine that's essential for true life. And you know, I thought of this as I read through this chapter, and I thought of it in connection to this past Sunday, and those who were able to be here. You know, you think about those words of John in 1 John that our sermon was based upon, and this fact of John saying that we even have this confidence before the Lord when we are living the way the Lord wants us to. When love is flowing from our lives the way that the Lord wants it. And I thought of this in connection with this idea of God's things. And notice how John's words there of even showing this life of sanctification as also another set of evidence that we can have confidence, it's still pointing towards God's things. It's not a confidence to say you can go around this world and have success. This is even more confidence that when you stand before the Lord on the last day, this is what you're going to hear. Welcome. And so notice that even as John brings in this aspect of what we've been talking about here at times, of the Lord's blessing us because we're obeying, and you notice that word, because was right in one of the sentences that John used. And I don't have it open in front of me right now, but he used that word as because. And let me go to it. I don't want to take here too long, but rather than me paraphrasing, let me quote it specifically. Here, speaking about that aspect of receiving from in prayer, you know, we have confidence before God and receive from Him anything we ask because we obey His commands and do what pleases Him. And yet, this confidence is still all pointing to not you'll have a good earthly life, but the confidence of here's how you stand before God. Notice it still is all directing towards God's things. And I think it's kind of a neat connection to the truths of Scripture and how it ties in with what the author has been speaking about here in this chapter. Pastor. Oh, well, good. Any other questions or comments? Let's close with prayer then. O Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, help us to constantly and consistently focus on your things, the things that you reveal to us in Scripture, the things that are revealed to us to ensure us and make us certain that all is right between us and our Heavenly Father, and that heaven is our home because of what you have done for us. May we never tire of learning and hearing again and again of the doctrines, of the teachings of Scripture. May we never tire of hearing about the theology of how we are saved. And let us understand that these teachings, these doctrines, this theology is indeed practical for every aspect of our lives. May we grow in our faith, grow in our understanding, grow in our wisdom, and in that growth, may we grow in our lives lived for you. We ask for your help in these areas of our life. Make us diligent students of your word and make us eager to live our lives for you. Amen.